call the meeting of the Columbia County Board of Education to order. Everyone stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All in favor, raise your right hand. Any opposed? Seeing that, the agenda is approved. I'll turn it over to Superintendent Flint for budget presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, board members. We appreciate you being here for another review of our budget. As you know, at the last regularly scheduled board meeting, we were able to do the first review of our budget. This morning, the presentation, we haven't made any changes to that, and so we'll go through similarly the same presentation that Mr. Casado went through at the last board meeting. We do want to thank members of the public that are here. I see the news is here. It looks like we have 3 or 4 members of the public, so thank you all for being engaged in this process. When we get to the end of the presentation, we will have a public input time, and we're looking forward to that as well. So without further ado, I'll let Mr. Casado come up. I'll come back up to do my little portion, and then looking forward to your input.
Good morning. Okay, so we're going to go through the exact same presentation as Dr. Flint said as we did last Tuesday. And so the first few slides are just a budget process overview, both kind of during this time, but also throughout the fiscal year. We ask you more to approve the budget at the legal reporting level, which is the expenditure function and revenue source by fund. And then we manage that budget as district personnel within what you've approved, and periodically throughout the year, of course, do reviews of the budget to assess performance and whether any adjustments are necessary to remain relevant and effective. And then, if so, we bring you that via a budget amendment, and that's if we believe that any budgets will exceed what's currently approved by fund and function. And then upon approval, we adjust the budget, and that's what we use moving forward. And again, this isn't a requirement or anything like that from a legal perspective, but it is a good internal control process to ensure we're communicating with you and the public that we would like to modify the budget at some level. You also see monthly reports, financial reports, as you know, both for the general fund, school nutrition fund, special projects, but also the building program, and that one looks a little bit different, and it's detailed by project, by each East Law cycle that's still active and has funds to be spent. And so you see those and approve those each month as well. Okay, so getting into the proposed budget, this is without needed improvements, which we'll get into later in the presentation. But very similar to what we see every year with your estimated revenue sources at the top of the left-hand side, and then your estimated expenditures by function on the left-hand side. And then each column is a different fund that we manage independently from one another. So the general fund there has total estimated revenues of right above $390 million, and then total estimated expenditures of $398 million in the general fund. And then special revenue and school nutrition are again your federal funds and your school nutrition program as well. And you can see the estimated revenue and expenditures there. Building fund is the building program with estimated revenue at about $55 million. And total expenditures of $154 million, and they're going to be higher because we are currently spending down bond funds that we recently issued, and so as we're spending those down on projects, you're going to anticipate that expenditure exceeding revenue in that way. Debt service fund is pretty much a wash every year. It's what we use to, of course, pay our bonds, and then workers' compensation fund for our self-pay workers' comp program that we have in the districts. So that's how the numbers stand for improvements, and we'll get into those later and then take a look at the budget. So general fund breakdown of revenue is on the left-hand side here, very similar to years past. About 60%, a little less, from state revenue, about 40% from local revenue, and then a tiny bit in impact aid funds that are allowed to be in the general fund for operations. And then the right-hand side is when you add all those funds together, it does change the revenue distribution a little bit because you've added those federal programs, there's some nutrition in there. So 50% state, 4.5% federal, and about 45% local is the distribution of revenue there. And so if we get into the general fund more specifically, we like to bring you this every year and update this for you with relevant data. We have 2025 as the most recent data, just kind of puts things into context. So starting at the top, we're the 15th largest out of 180 school districts. When you look at FTE reported on the QE allotment sheet, the next few are as a percent of the total budget, what we spend in each area. And so we are 6th out of 180, so we spend the 6th most as a percent of our budget on instruction out of 180 districts, so that's a very good thing, of course. We spend 178th most, so at the bottom of the list of a percent spent per FTE for pupil services. General administrations, when we talk about, we are last in the state as a percent, so we spend the least as a percent on general administration out of 180 school districts. And we look at those, the last one is how much we spend total per FTE, per pupil expenditure. So 12,155 last year makes us 174th out of 180. So we're spending little as compared to other districts in the state. When you look at the districts that are spending less, they are smaller districts with fewer than 5,000 FTE. I'd like to show you this each year as well. It's just an expenditure comparison in general categories. Just like in years past, we spend about 90% of the general fund budget on salaries and benefits. That's the vast majority of our operations, our people. And the rest on things like fuel, insurance, textbook, school supplies, all those things that it takes to run a school from a non-personnel perspective. These are the changes in our employer matching benefits for next year. FICA and Medicare are remaining the same. There is an increase on teacher retirement up to 22.32%, so a 1.87% change. Health insurance for certified and non-certified employees is also increasing to $23,220, so a 2.65% increase there. And then life insurance and our supplemental retirement program remain the same for next year. So when we put those sort of state mandated, if you will, increases onto a slide or onto dollar amounts, this is what it looks like in total. So we already built into the budgets a step increase for all employees. Again, that's tied in, you're kind of tied in to do that because of the way the state funds you T&E, teaching, a training and experience for teachers. So we lose out on that if we didn't do it. So a step increase costs about $4.2 million. That state health increase about 2.8, and then TRS, that slight increase, percentage-wise, is still about $1.5 million to the general fund budget. I like to look at inflation every year while we talk about budget, and this is a snapshot of Consumer Price Index 12-month percentage change from March of 25 to March of 26. And you can see it broken down in the different categories that the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics presents it. We really like to use the one to the far left, that's all items. It kind of combines all categories together and gives you an overall snapshot of inflation. And so from March of last year to March of this year, that's a 3.3%. We then take that and add it to our history of salary increases. We go back to 2020 for conversation purposes. have plugged in those U.S. inflation rates there. And if you add all those up, we're at about 27.3% inflation since 2020. And we've also, on the right-hand side, reported all the cost of living adjustments we've done throughout the year, throughout the years, as well as any one-time stipends or supplements that we or the state have been able to provide. And so when you add the permanent percentage cost of living adjustments together over that time, we're at 16.9%. So we're approximately 10.5% off of inflation when you look at cost of living adjustments that we've been able to do for the salary schedule since that time. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Flint to go through the general fund improvements, and then I'll be back.
Thank you, Mr. Casado. I'd also like to thank all of our departments and schools. As you all know, this is not a once a year kind of effort. All the folks you see in the room and a whole lot at all of our local schools put in a lot of time to make sure that we have a very accurate and a budget that shows the investment of this school district. And so as we talk about needed improvements for this year, that is basically what we're going for. Where are we putting our money that's an investment? One, they will help us continue the good work that we're doing, or make an adjustment that may be a return on investment, depending on that position. I would say that if you remember last year, we were able locally to do a 4% raise, as Mr. Casado was talking about. We did an analysis after all of the school district budgets were finalized last year, and we were somewhere right in the neighborhood of the top 5% that were able to do an increase in pay locally and a step increase for employees. And so kudos to you as a board. We're putting the money back where I would suggest, and I know you would, it belongs with our people. We're obviously a very heavy people-centered business, and as you saw from the inflation rates, we haven't been able to keep up, but we're doing better than most districts. And this year, I think, is no exception. Of course, we won't know what all the other school districts are able to do. We do know there was a one-time adjustment recently we were able to provide, and that was a flow-through from the state. It did cost us about $2.5 million locally. And so that did help, but those are not ongoing increases. And so we're trying to get the cost of living where it will continue to go. We're very hopeful that the state over the next couple of years will make some adjustments, whether it be to the teacher salary schedule or to all schedules, to help us continue this work. But that ultimately is where that's going to happen. So the largest portion of this we're recommending this year with where we are currently with the budget is the 3% cost of living to all employees across the board. Obviously, you can see that's the largest portion. We do have the next three top areas that are an investment into our special education services. I think when I was up here the other day, I didn't go back to something that we spent a good bit of time the last couple of years, and something you were able to fund earlier this year for all of our special education department. And just as a reminder, we did and have implemented increased school-based support. Not only did that happen at that time, but that will be happening through our reorganization moving through the summer. We added 5 registered behavior technicians at that time. We're looking to add 3 more through this budget. We did a number of staffing incentives, and again, looking across market analysis and what other districts are doing, not only did some receive additional pay depending on where they are with the job they're doing, but many also received release time to make sure that they could get their work done. So as we continue to do that work, we are adding a few things in this budget. We believe that with all of this work that we've done, we'll be at the level of staffing that we've been discussing for the last 2 or 3 years, and something that we worked through in the Excellence in Governance Institute. That was one of our main goals. And so thank you for the work you've done on that, and this budget is no exception. Just a reminder, we also have a benefits and compensation committee that makes recommendations and looks at a market analysis across the state and the southeast, as well as locally. Most of this comes directly from that committee. You'll see some of these minor adjustments every year, depending on the work that they're doing. If there's a specific area that we're concerned about, or maybe a group of people are concerned about, we'll give it to that committee. They'll run it through their process and come back with a recommendation to the next budget. I will say we have a couple of additional positions here. We do need an additional purchasing agent. We are recommending adding an open records request position. We've had a high number of those coming in, and they haven't slowed down. So we need to hire a full-time person just to take care of that work. And 2 HVAC techs, we're outsourcing much of this now, so we can believe we can save money and do that in-house. And then administrative position. As you know, we've implemented the last couple of years a weighted staffing formula. That has brought in additional positions. As we've decreased the number of students, that's actually increased the number of positions in the local schools. And so our principals, assistant principals, and teachers have had to schedule very carefully to make that work. As you know, we're funded through the QBE formula from the state of Georgia. That mirrors that, and so we make sure that not only we schedule for the needs of the students, but also what matches the QBE funding. And so that has brought in just a great number of positions. That's where we've been able to continue to see a reduction in our class size at the same time with limited budget resources. So with all that said, those are the improvements that we're suggesting. If you don't have any other questions for me, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Prasad. Thank you.
Okay, so this slide is the same snapshot of the budget we saw earlier, with down at the bottom needed improvements added, and that 10.657 on the general fund column adds back to what Dr. Flynn just reviewed with you. As we get further into the process, we'll incorporate those costs into the expenditure functions accordingly. It just takes some time and effort, a lot of work to do that. We wanted to make sure we had an idea of where we were heading before we went down that road. The only other exception here is school nutrition at the top has a needed improvement line for revenue. And we'll go through that here in a minute as well. Everything else is the same. Okay, so as we get into school nutrition, we like to review the history of the program's fund balance. School nutrition is a unique federal program in that it carries a fund balance each year and brings in revenue and expenses in slightly different ways than the other federal programs do. And we really like for it, and everybody would, at every district would like for school nutrition to be a self-sustaining program. I think we're on the way to get there. We just got to continue to make some adjustments as we move forward. Fund balance grew pretty rapidly there on the heels of COVID and the way that they were reimbursing meals and free meals for all students. That ended, and we've been intentionally spending down this fund balance to get it to a more reasonable level through investment back into the program. A lot of money was spent on equipment and things like that in our cafeterias and our lunchrooms. So if you carry the fund balance or project the fund balance at the end of this year, I have it around $6.3 million. If you take the current projected revenue and expenditures in the budget right now, it still shows a deficit of about $1.1 million. And so again, if you carry that through the end of next fiscal year, about $5.19 million. And so we'd like to recommend doing something to help offset the deficit as we move forward and help make sure the program is sustainable. So no expenditure improvements for school nutrition at all. The only thing we're going to recommend is on the revenue side, but before we do that, I want to show you the paid lunch equity calculation from the state of Georgia, and they do this based off of federal guidelines. And what it is a calculation of a target weighted average price for paid lunches. So these are not free and reduced students. These are what students pay at the register if they're a paid status. And so for school year 24-25, they had it at $4.01. And they carry through this formula of adding 2% plus the most recent CPI. And so when you do that math, it brings this year, the price this year that we're in right now, to $4.25. As you know, we're not there right now at our registers. That's $3.75. And then if you were to carry this forward one more year into the budget year we're talking about, assuming that similar inflation, you'd be at $4.40, give or take. We're not recommending that going up that high, but we do have a recommendation for you to consider when it comes to meals for next school year. Again, these are all paid meals. This will not impact the price of reduced students' meals or, of course, those that are on free status. So if you look at paid lunches, correction, we're at $3.50 currently, and we are recommending going to $4 for next year. And that exact same methodology follows through each of these levels. Paid breakfast, we're currently at $1.75. We're recommending $2, that blue highlight. We're recommending going to $5 for paid adult lunches and $3 for paid adult breakfast. So when you estimate those based on a projection of meals served for this year, we believe that increase will bring in about $660,000 in additional revenue, which will greatly help that $1.1 million or so deficit that I just showed you already incorporated in the budget. Okay. As we look at the other federal programs, the other special revenue funds, along with lottery pre-K, which is provided by the state, this is what we're budgeting for currently. Again, this is very difficult to predict right now because the federal government's fiscal year doesn't start until October 1st, so we're not even going to know truly what's being funded at 100% until around that time, maybe a little bit later into the fiscal year. But we do a real conservative estimate based on where we are today with federal funds and kind of what we know has happened to the student populations that each of them serve. And so as we go through these quickly, special education has about $105,000 for preschool, SPED, and 6B flow-through, which is all the federal, all the other special education programs that the federal government supports at about $4.6 million. I do want to remind everybody that this is by no means our entire budget for these programs. We spend a lot more in state and local dollars to support these programs where necessary and the students that it serves. I'm just showing you the small federal portion, if you will, that we're given for these reasons. A little bit there, $44,000 for homeless students, about $2.8 million for Title I. So that'll only support your Title I schools. Title II is teacher training and professional development, about $600,000. Title III, supporting the English learning students, small grant there, $82,000. Title IV is a student support grant at $190,000. Vocational is the federal government's portion of our CCBOE program. They throw in about $160,000. Lottery pre-K is the only one of these that comes from the state, and that's pretty self-explanatory. That supports our pre-K classes across the district that we have. And then ROTC, that program, $488,000 to support that program at our high schools. Okay, so again, same exact proposed budget with needed improvements as we've seen before. The only change here is you'll see outgoing transfers in the general fund. We've added a $20 million transfer to the building program. You'll see that incoming transfer at the top of the building fund to account for it being moved over there. Other than that, everything remains the same as what we've already reviewed and talked about. And then finally, just want to remind everybody of the schedule of the budget meeting dates and times. We've last Tuesday, April 21st, been through that budget presentation. We're here today doing the first meeting for public input We do have another one during the board meeting on May 12th, and so we'll do public input during that time as well. And then we'll ask for tentative approval of the budget after that during the meeting, and then ask for final approval June 16th. And that is all I have now. I guess I'll take any questions you might have before we do public input.
Mr. Casado, I just wanted to, first of all, say thank you for all the work you do putting this budget together. And then also walk you through some of my numbers and calculations just to give you a chance to correct anything. So based on what I'm seeing from neighboring counties, I would like to do a cost of living increase for the staff from 3% to 5%. So in my calculations, this would cost $5.5 million in addition to the $10.7 million for needed improvement. Is that about correct?
Yes, that sounds
Okay. So my second part is I think we can do this, and let me walk you through my numbers to explain why I believe we can do this. So we began fiscal year 2026, this current fiscal year, with the general fund balance of $108.7 million. We are projected to end this current fiscal year with the general fund balance of $126 million. So that means we're on track to finish this fiscal year 2026 with a $17.3 million surplus, which is what our Moody's report said would happen, that we would be running a surplus. So it is also consistent with our history since fiscal year 2021, in which we've had an annual surplus ranging from $18 to $30 million each year. So given the projected surplus of this year, given our 5 and 6 year trends, I believe we can do this even within our current operations budget to do the recommended improvements and also to do that 5% cost of living increase without even raising property taxes. I also would like to see, and I believe based on my analysis, that we have room to do some of the items that were on our improvements list from last year that we didn't vote on. So that would be, one of the ones I really wanted last year was hiring 6 bed paraprofessionals. Now last year we had that at about $186,000. I imagine it would be a little bit more, but that's, for the board to kind of think about. That's something else I would maybe like to have in that needed improvements list that I don't think would substantially change the numbers for what we're talking about. And then also to consider from our list last year, an elementary K through 7 math specialist brought in at 220 days for $126,000. So those items together would be less than $400,000. So still in the vicinity of what we could do in our operations budget that would be sustainable without a tax increase. So based on my numbers, is that approximately correct for what you say, that would be sustainable moving forward if we were to do those things?
Yeah, I think your numbers are
Okay.
accurate there, but relatively accurate, what you stated.
Okay.
How would you be able to run the numbers that you're based on this?
Yeah, I can rerun them and look at it, if you will, incorporate it or tell you how much more it will cost for, concretely through my estimate. Although I do think those are very close, the numbers I participated.
Now, I do have other questions. I just want to give board members a chance. But
Looking up the SPED, some things have changed in the SPED program. I know we had requests for additional funds for things in that department. Based on what we have allocated to SPED on the sheet as our priorities, and considering the last year's recommendations, are those 6 SPED people still needed? Is there been a restructuring to where they're not necessarily needed? Why are they taken off the list?
Well, obviously, we have the reorganization we've been working through, but we also are funded for most of these types of positions from the state. So we want a reimbursable when we do these positions. We want to make sure they're a reimbursable position. If not, then that just continues to ramp up year after year. Many of those positions that you're talking about are not funded, so they're already completely local board funded. So the more we add to those positions, the more it's going to cost you ramped up year after year. So if you want to add those, it's not just a 1 year, it's going to be a many-year deal. Now, we do believe we've provided many, many more supports in those areas through that work on the reorganization with our special education department. So the recommendations completely are all from the professionals that are doing the work. Obviously, we work closely with them, but we're going to rely on their recommendations.
Based on the reorganization that you just mentioned, the 6 may not necessarily still be needed.
That's correct. Yeah, and each school will have allocations based on their weighted formula. So once where we're gonna put them, we would have to go back in and readjust a weighted formula. And so I don't know exactly where they would go. I mean, we would have to figure that out, obviously. You just don't add a position to add a position.
I just had a couple more. Anybody else, anyone wants to jump in?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think the step increase slide gives us a little bit of an indication as to the mean as far as age, if we're getting older versus younger. Is that within the average, that step increase that you typically see, say, in the last 5 years?
For us, as Columbia County, yes, it does, of course, continue to get a little more expensive every year, if you will, as we raise the salary schedule, the cost of living adjustments, and things like that, and as benefits that correspond, such as TRS, continue to increase. But it is about right, yes, from year to year.
I have a question about the fund balance for school nutrition.
Yes.
What is an appropriate or recommended fund balance for nutrition? Where are we right now?
Yeah, the state used to have, the feds used to have guidance that they didn't want you to have more than 3 months of operations. They've extended that now to 6 months of operations before you have to submit a plan to spend down the funds. Besides that, I really think that in the 2 to 3 month fund balance as a look at operating expenditures is appropriate. And so when you do that math, that puts us around the $5 million mark.
Is that kind of already in your mind?
It is. I'd like to keep the program around $5 million as we look to make it a sustainable program financially each year. I think that would be appropriate. A little more, a little less, a little more would be okay, of course, but that's kind of a target number there.
And I also noticed that the increase for adults is lower than the increase for children as far as the amount of money that you're recommending percentage-wise. I haven't calculated that, but what's the thinking behind just increasing adults 25 cents and children 50 cents?
I really think it's because, as you see, we don't have heavy participation, as much participation from adults as we would like. It's not bringing in a huge increase in revenue there. It also does bring it, as little as this sounds, are inconsequential to an even $5, and you'll see that throughout. And when you're able to do an even $4 to $5, whatever your meal price is, that really does help efficiency at the register, because they're not having to deal with change and things like that. However, I understand your point, and you can look at, if you'd like, doing more of a equitable increase, if you will, for adults as we have students from a percent perspective.
Last year, rather than increasing it the full amount, we did part of the amount.
I believe that if I remember right, we brought the recommendation last year for paid lunches of $4 last year. We were at $3.10, I think, and we recommended going all the way to $4. You all decided to do it about halfway at $3.50, knowing that we would need to come back and talk about this again.
So what would happen if we didn't do the full 50 cents this year? Or did you recalculate that, Scott? How would it affect the overall progress?
Yes, I could recalculate that. I imagine it'd bring that estimated revenue increase closer to maybe $500,000 instead of 660. Certainly would still be very helpful on the way to balancing the budget for school nutrition. But I can rerun it for sure. In fact, actually, it's right there for you. Because the analysis is already done at 375, right above 4. So if we would have just increased from 350 to 375, it would reduce your revenue about $180,000. So yeah, about $500,000 is where you'd be on that increase instead of $660,000.
It's a question all that can answer to, but teachers, if they eat in lunchroom, they pay the adult price.
Correct.
Do you remember the meal served last year in comparison to what was?
don't know the exact numbers, you mean the quantity?
Yes.
Yeah, so we increased the price as we just talked about last year, and you always worry, is there a breaking point where increasing the price too much will hurt your participation? And so you've really done nothing for yourself in the terms of revenue at the bottom line. From my discussions throughout the year with Dr. Ping, despite increasing the cost, participation's up a few percentage points. So we haven't seen that. And I think it's because for, let's say, $4 or $3.75, that's still a very reasonable cost or price for a meal, even when you compare it to packing maybe your kids' lunch at home and the time it takes as well. So I think that people are still seeing the value there at the price we're currently charging. And I hope that would be the same at $3.75 or $4 wherever we go.
Anything on the building program, we seem to be doing some transfers pretty regularly through the years. Anything there to provide some relief, maybe some of the things that we suggested or looked at for funding?
I'm sorry, say that word.
Is there a way to provide, transfer less dollars and still maintain the building fund in a comfortable place? Is there something else we can do with the building program to allow to fund other things in our budget?
I don't know that there's more revenue sources that the building program could bring in to help do less of a transfer, if you will, to your question. I think it's certainly, if you don't do the transfer, we're going to have to look at the list of those projects that are planned for next year based on a comprehensive or the 10-year building program and recalibrate and reschedule some projects further down the line or not move at all. So that's kind of where we stand, I think, today with how we've planned out the building program moving forward.
Kind of follow up on that line of questioning. If we don't transfer these funds this year and we continue to operate the building program at this current rate with the projects planned, would we be looking at a debt service millage rate this year to keep that program up at the current pace?
No, so the transfer that we're recommending is not to help pay for any of the projects that are currently approved by you, the board, that you've seen. None of the high schools, none of the kind of, even the smaller ones that we brought, such as the warehouse. Those things are all already paid for, essentially. What this does is help us to, again, tackle the list of the other things that we have planned to do next fiscal year as part of the program, and to do those in the way that they were sequenced out in a timely fashion, right? So, but to answer your question, this would not cause a debt service millage rate, not transferring the funds. We're not looking at a debt service millage rate whatsoever right now, or in my eyes in the future years. So, of course, anything can change. That's not on the plans at the moment.
I guess one more question to add to that. Given that this is for additional projects, Dr. Flint, is there a reason why you would put the $20 million from our operations towards additional capital projects versus directly into the classroom, maybe stipends for teachers to get school supplies? And I'm hearing a lot about that, or even potentially a tax relief come millage rate time. What is the reason why we would put that $20 million extra into additional capital projects beyond what our East Lost revenue is funding?
Thank you for that. If you're hearing something about classroom supplies, please send it to me. We're extremely well funded, and in our survey, we get feedback every year, and that is one of the highest rated feedback areas. So probably there may be just some miscommunication there, and we would like to address that with individuals that may think that they aren't able to get something. So please let me know where that's coming from, because we have a pretty good plan for that. As far as the funding plan for the 10-year plan, that will have to go back 4 or 5 years to the discussion on developing a 10-year building program. If y'all might recall, this goes to, we went to every school and had committees at every school that gave input. We also had project management look at all of the projects, and from that, we developed a 10-year plan. That 10-year plan has been sequenced out, as Mr. Casado just said, and the decision, we laid that out for the board at that time on how to pay for it. And most of the locally funded, these local projects for individual schools were through balanced fund transfers. If you go back, SPLOST obviously is a great tool to fund capital projects, but it in no way is intended to do all of them, and it hasn't in the history of the school district. Many of those have been funded for many, many years from the general fund. As a matter of fact, all of them used to be prior to the implementation of SPLOST, either that or bonds. So that's why this was a large discussion with the community and with the board. We're running the play right now that was laid out 3 years ago, 4 years ago when we set that out. If you decide not to, we would just have to take projects off of the list.
Just to clarify, you're saying that when the community was briefed about the 10-year building program back in 2022, that brief included letting them know to expect annual substantial transfers, $10 and $20 million from the general funds each year. That was part of that brief to the community?
That was, as a matter of fact, we presented it at every high school and talked with the community about past transfers and possible future transfers.
This list, I don't have it in front of me, but it touches many, many schools across our district, and we're not talking about new builds or fluff. This is trying to maintain our fiscal plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And every school does have things on the list. Obviously, we just opened 2 brand new, so they would have much less. So the older the school, typically a little bit more was needed in some of those areas. Once we approve that plan, that has been on our website. You can go to any school and see the list of the projects that are planned for each of those schools, and hopefully we'll be able to get to all of those. Obviously, there's a lot of aging schools that are a little older than some of our new ones, and I think a lot of the discussion at that time was bringing all classroom schools to a standard, and then over the next life of the plan, past the 10-year plan, move it into a comprehensive plan so we maintain that standard for the life of the school district.
I believe the community would love for us to reassess. I think it would be important to them, given that we're close to 5 years and things have changed and we're looking at the potential for more SPLOST out there. The public, could get in today with a lot of SPLOST, and I think it's worth it to review the building program. With that suggestion to the rest of the board.
These projects, the $180 million in bonds proceeds that we received December of 2025, these projects were not included in that money. That money didn't cover these projects. These were additional to those funds. Can we have a list of those? I've not seen a list of those projects that $20 million would be used for.
Yeah, I have copies. I think I have enough, but if you want one, you just pass it out.
And then I have a question before I look over this. $126 million, how much of that is contracts due that we've already signed for that we'll be paying for throughout that fiscal year?
You mean on the budget spreadsheet, the construction?
Yes,
line?
construction.
Okay, I would say 90%, right, of that is already contracts we've signed, whether that's Lakeside or Harlem.
Okay. And one more question, that $2.5 million under the building fund for instruction,
Yes.
which capital projects would fall under instruction for 2.5?
All of that, it would be student technology devices that we're allowed to fund through eSPLOST
Okay.
or infrastructure upgrades. All those go to instruction
Okay.
for technology infrastructure,
Thanks.
servers, things like that.
I'll probably just, for my fellow board members, I'll probably spend some time looking over this and bringing these questions to our next meeting for this list.
All right, I said one last one for me.
Yes.
Who was on the benefit and comp committee?
I'm on there, Mr. Wright's on there, we've had several principals on there at different levels, so teacher, a para, I think there's another, trying to remember, special ed para as well. So it's a wide array.
All internal?
All internal, yes, sir.
Thank you.
One other question about the building fund. I see it says our estimated ending fund balance as of June 30th, 2026, so the end of this fiscal year, is projected to be at $189 million for the capital projects, the building fund. Had we not received those $180 million in bond sales in December, would that balance really have been only $9 million for the capital fund?
Yeah, probably would have been around that. It's an estimate. Of course, though, those projects that were funded with the bonds were contingent upon the bond selling. So you would not have had the expenditure level that you have, but probably would not have been able to do the projects had the bonds not sold. So it's kind of a wash, for lack of a better, but yeah, probably where we're at would be at $10 million or so.
So I guess along those lines, because it was Harlem High School primarily that was funded, out of that $126 million, would you say a majority of that is for Harlem High School, or is the majority of that for Evans and Lakeside still?
We'll have to look at it to know specifically, but as, you know, this year we're going into Lakeside's winding down, that project's almost over. I think Evans would be in its final year, so it's probably pretty big. Evans is in there, and then as Harlem ramps up next year, I would say there's probably as much Evans in there as Harlem. And of course, Evans will die off after next year, and Harlem will really be the one that is the majority of that expenditure. Group Briar, if it comes on as well.
Thank you. These are
No, it's okay.
rough estimates, so I won't hold you to them.
Any more questions before we go to public? Okay. Thank you, fellow board members. At this time, we are going to have public input. It's the time when the members of the public have an opportunity to give input. And we have one person who has requested to speak, and it's Janet Duggan.
Good morning. I see that there's a list for the general fund transfer, the capital fund, the $20 million. I had asked for that at the last presentation at the budget was presented last Tuesday. I had sent a follow-up email. I haven't received that. You've got a copy here. Is that something I could receive today while I'm here? All right, thank you. I appreciate that. And I do want to thank Mr. Kim for your request to have the 10-year building program kind of re-looked at and reassessed. I think that's a good thing, whether it changes or not. You know, that's to be determined. It may just continue on the same pace that it's at. But I think that having a reassessment is probably a wise decision and very prudent. I know we've had references to the 2022 year when this initial 10-year project was presented. And I've looked at those presentations, and when I look at the numbers of what was presented, the current high schools alone are 40% over those original numbers. And that's just with Lakeside, Evans, and Harlem High School. That's with estimates for Greenbrier and Grovetown, and the estimates that have been presented for the high schools that are being done are generally about 50% under what it actually cost is. So basically, we're spending a lot more money than what was presented in 2022. And if that's something that the board continues to want to do, then I just think that deserves an assessment, a reassessment, and have public input, and let the public know, like, we initially planned in 2022 for the building program, the 10-year building program to cost, I believe it was $400 to $500 million total. I think it was if you look at those presentations, $493 million. If you included the items like we're talking about today, which are kind of ongoing things, the 20 million that you're asking for, that was included in that 493 million. When you look at what we've already spent and projected to spend, we're looking at well over that, like I said, 40% just at the high school. So to your point, I think that's something that absolutely should be done. The other question that I had, or another comment, was during that presentation, there's a per pupil expenditure, and we are, and that's for general administration I'm referring to, and we are the lowest of the lowest, which is actually a very positive thing. That means we spend very little in administration compared to other schools, particularly the size of this school. So I think that's a good thing, but I do have a question as far as, I know that there seems to be more consultants that are being used, and I'm familiar with one for SPED through speaking with some of the SPED folks. I'm aware of some other ones as well. And my question that I asked last week, again, I sent a follow-up email, I haven't received a response yet, is where do those consultant expenses come from in the budget? Are they listed under general administration? Are they listed under instruction? So for example, if you have a SPED consultant come in and they're consulting about instruction, does that then go under instruction, or does that go under administration? And I understand each of these consultants may go on under a different topic or a different category, but I think that helps give us a picture as to the type of consultants that we're bringing in, and if they're truly helping instruction and that's helping that, and then it changes the numbers. So I'd like to have that information, or at least have the board have a discussion about that information, whether, so that we can understand a little bit better where that money's coming from. And then lastly, as far as the ORR position, I've been very clear about my concern regarding the open records process. I'm still waiting on some open records, and we're looking at 20 business days since I made a request. So, this position helps that, and I think that's a positive thing, right? But what was said today is that there's been so many open records requests that it requires a full-time person. And last year, calendar year 2025, I did the calculation. The first 15 minutes are free. After that, there's a fee that's paid for by the person requesting the open records request. And given the numbers of requests for 2025, the 15 minutes that's not paid for totals 62 total hours. And it's a simple math equation. That's a 1.25 hours per week. So just let's say we doubled the open records requests for this year, and it was 500 requests, you're still looking at 2.5 hours a week, plus the time that it takes for the other. I don't have a problem with that, but I think that maybe there's some other job duties that this person could do for IT other than open records, and maybe that needs to be looked at so that it's a good return on your investment. And then lastly, as far as just that's all what I asked last week that I'm referencing. The new thing that I would like to ask or make a point of is when I reviewed the Moody's and the S&Ps for the 2020 report, the 2023 report, and the 2025 report, for each of those reports, it specifically states that the capital fund is being also funded by the general fund. In other words, general fund transfers were expected. So that's something that Moody's S&P has reported for the last 6 years. I also heard Dr. Flip make a comment that during the 2022 presentation, and that was a given, that those general funds would be transferred. So it sounds like that's something that was expected. Yet, this is the first year that we've seen it actually show up in the budget. So that's confusing to me. So it sounds like Moody's knew it was going to happen, S&P knew it was going to happen, Dr. Flint knew it was going to happen, Chairman Deagle, you knew that it was going to happen because there were discussions about it. Yet, for the last 6 years, it's not been in the budget until this year. So maybe that could be addressed as well. Thank you very much.
Is there any staff, Mr. Casado, Dr. Flint, everyone, for your continued work on this. And, we will take this information and continue to ponder it. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, raise your hand. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.